All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been working my way through the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015 6th edition. We're in the home stretch of Chapter 8, and we're up to page 294 talking about how to use cookies and URL encoding. One thing about cookies is cookies are what are referred to as key value pairs. So there's the key, there's the value. Whoops. See if I can do that a little bit better here. Let me click inside of here and see if I can get that. All right, so when we work with this stuff, there's the key, there's the value. There's the key, there's the value. There's the key, and there's the value. All right, so kind of keep that in mind as we start. Cookies are name value pairs that are stored on the user's browser or on the user's hard drive. A web application sends a cookie to a browser via an HTTP response. Then each time the browser sends a request to the server, it attaches any cookies that are associated with it. By default, ASP.NET uses a cookie to store the session ID. All right, but if cookies are turned off, you can use cookieless session IDs. A session cookie is kept in browser memory and exists only for the duration of the browser session. That's as opposed to a persistent cookie, which is kept on the disk and is retained until the cookie's expiration date. When you create a cookie, at a minimum, you have to give it a name and a value. Typically, you give it more information than that. So here's the name, and that would be the value. Typically, when you use cookies, you also give the cookies what's called an expiry date, which is the date time value when the cookie should expire. You must give it a name, which is the cookie name. You must give it a value, which is a string assigned to the cookie. You can also give it a secure feature, which is a Boolean value, which indicates whether the cookie should be sent only over a secure or an HTTPS connection. Shown here on the screen are some common members of the cookie collection class, such as name, which is the cookie with a specified name, count, which are the number of cookies in your cookie collection, add to add a cookie to the collection, clear to remove all the cookies from the collection, and remove followed by a name to remove just a specified cookie. So cookies are managed in collections defined by this HTTP cookie collection class. To access the cookie collection, you use the cookies property of the HTTP request or the HTTP response object. To delete a persistent cookie, create a cookie with the same name as the one you have, but you set the expiry date to a time that is already passed. So I can literally, if I want to, I can set a cookie right now that will expire in the year 3000. I won't be around to see it, but I can do that. But if I've got a cookie that's out there that I want to have go away, I set its expiry date to, let's say, today is the 26th of May, 2017. If I set its date to 5/25/2017, which is yesterday, the cookie then will auto-expire. Now you can enable and disable cookies in your browser. They show you the way to do it in IE on page 299, and then they explain it here, and they also explain how to do it in Chrome, and they explain how to do it in Firefox. Let's just look at the one for Chrome because that's my personal browser of choice. All right. So with Chrome running here, I can go up here and click my menu icon and select Settings. All right, which gets me to right here. I can scroll to the bottom of the page and find the advanced setting hyperlink, which is right there. and then I can click the content settings button in the privacy group, all right, which is where I think I am, but I might have to go down to privacy. There we go. And find the content settings button. And if you look there, there are my cookie settings. So I can block all cookies if I want, all sites from setting cookies, or I can do what I want. Most people don't even know this stuff exists, so they just use the default, which most often works out okay. All right. That brings us to what I believe is the last topic that's discussed in the chapter, and that's URL encoding. And that's on pages 300 and 301. Then on 302 through 304, which is the rest of the chapter, they give an example program. But let's take a look at URL encoding. URL encoding provides yet another way to maintain state. It stores information in a page on the client. The information is stored in a query string that's added to the end of the URL. So it's in both these cases, it's what comes after the question mark. So we see here two query strings. The first one includes a single attribute named cat for category, and the second one includes two attributes, one named cat for the category, one named prod for the product. You add a query string by coding a question mark after the URL. Then you code the name of the first attribute and an equal sign and the value you want to assign to the attribute. To include another one, you put in an ampersand, then another name, then another attribute or a value, and you can keep doing that. In most cases, you'll use query strings within hyperlinks or anchor tags to pass this information from one page to another. To retrieve values encoded in a query string, you use the query string property of the request object. So there will be some examples shown here. Query strings can also be used in URLs that are specified for response, redirect, response.redirect permanent, or server.transfer calls. When you use a hyperlink, an anchor element, or a redirect or transfer that specifies the URL, the page is processed as if it's being requested for the first time. Different browsers impose different limits on the number of characters in a query string in a URL. Most provide at least 2K or 2,000 characters. Now, a recent development, which we'll talk about in Chapter 11, is the ability to create what are called SEO-friendly URLs, or friendly URLs, sometimes even called pretty URLs, that can improve search engine optimization. Let's hold off on those until we get to Chapter 11. All right? Ones that look more like this. So, we're almost to the end, but we've got 4 more pages here, I guess. I said 2 pages, but it's pages 302 through 305. In here, this shows an application by again showing 2 pages of a shopping cart with a couple of added features. The first one, as you can see down on the bottom here, on the bottom, it includes a welcome message that has the user's first name up here. And now so the name is stored in a cookie, and the footer in here shows the current date and time and the number of times the page has been accessed. So, how do we do that? Well, and there's our checkout page, which now we're able to log into. Remember, before we weren't actually doing the checkout page. So the ASP.NET code is shown on 303, and actually there's nothing right there that you shouldn't be able to understand. The associated C# code is shown on page 305. You'll notice first it uses system.web.caching because caching is being done. Here they're also doing some binding, which again, this is more database related, so if it doesn't totally make sense right now, don't let it bother you. All right? And it's using some locking to make sure that if one user is using something here, that other users can't overwrite what they've been trying to do. All right, that pretty much does it for this chapter. What I'm going to do, as I have been at least attempting to do here, is to go back, grab these two things of objectives, copy them to the clipboard, go down to the end, and paste them in so they're recopied. So again, in this chapter, we talked about quite a bit. It was a dry chapter. We talked about different ways of preserving state, including view state, session state, using cookies, application state, caching. We talked a little bit, although I did not do a good job of explaining it to you, going over the global.asax files. We talked about cookies in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage. And we described the use of URL encoding, which again will be discussed in more depth and more breadth of coverage. All right, when we get to later, when we get to the, I didn't do that from last chapter. When we get to chapter 11. So again, as always, with much of this stuff, you will be seeing it again. All right. When I go through the next chapter, which will be starting up in a couple of minutes, chapter 9, which starts in our textbook on page 309. All right, when we go over that chapter, just save this and get out of here. Okay. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Now I got to start up PowerPoint again. Chapter 9, which starts on page 309 in the book, is on how to work with master pages. All right, so we will be back to talk about that and show you a couple things about master pages, and then we'll talk about them in more depth and breadth of coverage when we get into the next chapter. All right, I'm getting there. So there it is. So we'll talk about master pages, which I believe is a little shorter chapter. We'll get into that in just a couple minutes.